Hi, bloody recap here. Today I'm going to explain a drama movie, The Invisible. Keep your eyes open and stay focused. Mom makes a toast about Nick, telling him what a good boy he has grown up to be even after his father's death, then gives him a gift that turns out to be a watch. He shows it to the guests and leaves the feast. Nick cuts himself a piece of cake and goes down to the tool table in the basement, where he examines the gun from the muzzle. It turns out to be just a dream. Breakfast is already waiting for him at the table. Nick wants to get into a literature class, but his mother isn't interested in that yet. Because graduation is in a week, his mother prioritizes him. He follows to school, where he gives the essay he wrote to Shane for money. A girl invites him to Avi's party tomorrow night, but Nick has to decline. In the bathroom, the bullies sting a guy named Pete. Annie shows up, who is extremely unhappy that Pete has money for anti-smoking gum, but he has no money to repay his debt, because he is involved in some dark dealings of this gang. In class, the teacher consolingly tells Jimmy that his poem wasn't bad, and it's Nick's turn, and he sits on the table and reads a poem that everyone should have liked, but when the bell rings, everyone just scatters. When Pitt is seated in the dining room, he notices his wounded arm and heads over to Annie. Attempting to pay off the debt for Pete is unsuccessful. She only discounts the money and sends him away. He calls her a pathetic loser who can't do anything and walks away. But she is not going to give up that easily, and after the fight they sit in the principal's office. One thing she doesn't understand is why he thinks he's better than her socially if he sells his own term papers and all he does is call himself a hypocrite, and the principal walks in. He lets Annie go, and they discuss her problems in private tomorrow. The principal doesn't understand why he got involved with her, since he is such an obedient guy, but Nick only begs to go home. Annie's stepmother has not cooked her brother Victor's dinner as usual, and they have a fight about it, and her father supports Annie because she does sit on the couch all day and does nothing. Annie quickly cooks her brother dinner and starts listening to music while picking at the wall with a knife. Victor asks if she is going out tonight. She says not now, but a little later, but we don't know where exactly. Nick is at home with his essays. Pete is his middleman in addition to his friend, who hands over the money from the guys for the work done. Pete asks if he will go to Evie's party, but he won't be here tomorrow night. He bought a ticket to London for a literary course. He hasn't notified his mother, so she finds out when he leaves. Annie leaves the house and is met by Marcus. They have come on a case to steal a car, but Annie is interested in the jewelry counter. She smashes it and collects the contents. She's out of her mind, and the guy doesn't like the idea. They hide in an alley, but the guy tells her that this is out of bounds. After the sleepover, Annie gets ready and Marcus asks her to leave her bag. She shouldn't shove it at school, it's not her phone's. But she thinks it's time for her to make some money and leaves, and Marcus gets mad and calls the police. At school, she hides the jewelry in her locker, and Pete peeks at her. As she paces around the school and looks over at Nick, the police are already opening the drawer, and when they find the jewels there, she is arrested. From the station she calls Marcus and tells him that she is out on bail. The trial is in a couple of weeks, but before that she has a clue who set her up. She will figure it all out herself. This conversation overheard by Detective Brian. In the meantime, Nick promises Pete that he will write him and asks him not to worry, because this is not the last goodbye. At home his mother is already waiting for him, who has been told about the delay of the flight he booked a month ago, but she does not even want to listen to him, because it is as if she has lived her whole life with a stranger. Nick is already getting ready for his flight, picking up the watch his mother gave him, and Pete gets punched outside the school. Annie tortures him at the depot. She thinks he's the one who ratted her out because Pete was watching her at the lockers. So Nick's flight is still 2 hours away. He decides to come to the party after all, where he tells the girl that he's leaving for London on the next flight, and she suggests that there's no time to waste. She asks why he needs this old watch when he has this cool watch. It turns out the watch he is wearing is the last gift from his late father. But at an intimate moment, he stops and throws the girl a ticket, wishing her a happy holiday. As he heads home himself, he amuses himself on the road and a car shows up that is clearly not with good intentions. When Nick tries to run, he gets run over and falls face first into the dirt. It turns out to be the bullies who are beating Nick, and Annie is sitting in the car. Pete begs her to stop the guys, but she just comes in and adds Nick. Annie wants to get an apology, but Nick calls her a loser. Then she punches him in the face and he falls into the creek, hitting his head on a rock. The bullies realize he's not breathing and are scared out of jail, but Annie forces his body to be pulled deep into the woods, where he gets a watch from his mother. They find a sewer manhole in the woods where they dump his breathless body, and we see him still moving his eyelids. She comes to see Marcus. When she tells him what she has done, he throws her out the door. In the morning, she burns her sweater in an effort to keep warm, and a perfectly healthy Nick leaves the woods. He comes to school and asks the girl why she didn't go to London, but she ignores him. When the teacher asks a question, Nick easily answers it, but the teacher still does not hear the answer and repeats Nick's words. When she asks for feedback about the speaker's last verse, which is Nick, the boys insult him. And even the girl he gave a ticket to London yesterday says that Nick always tries to act like he's above the others, but he thinks it's a prank and no one hears him on purpose. Then he throws the book at the shelves, but when he turns around the book is there again. In the principal's office, he tries to call his mother, but when the principal walks in, the phone disappears from his hands. He gets a call from his mother who can't find Nick. The principal promises to send someone to check if he's in school and asks him not to hang up. Nick tries to yell for his mom, but all he hears on the phone is that he has a bad feeling. In the hallways, he bumps into a girl, but no, it seems only to him, the girl is fine. As he runs home, he gets hit by a car, but Nick is surprisingly unharmed. At home, an agent walks past him and reports 18-year-old Nick Powell missing over the radio. When the cops leave, she tells him that she feels something happened to him because she knows him, but the police say she didn't know about London and leave. And when his mother closes the doors, Nick says he is dead, but no one hears him again. He wanders around the city, where not a soul notices him. Detective Brian wastes no time and strolls down the road near Avi's house, where a party was held last night, and notices a path leading out of the woods where he finds tire tracks and a side mirror. His assistant has had a chat with the principal. Nick had an argument with a girl named Annie Newton yesterday. At Annie's house, her father answers to the cops that she's on the roof. When they question her, Nick overhears them. The police send a search party to the woods, but her alibi is that she was with Marcus that night, and when Nick finds out she killed him for allegedly snitching on her, he throws her off the roof, but only he sees it. In the room, she calls Pete and asks him to come, because a search party has been sent into the woods. Nick comes home and tries to shoot himself, but alas, all in vain. The search party is briefed and even Pete is there. The group goes out to search, and when Pete gets a little behind, Detective Bryn's assistant is watching him. In Nick's room, a bird crashes into his window and lies on its last breath. It appears on his shoulder and is transported into his world, but when it dies it is also gone from his hands, which means he is still alive, just stuck in this world. He runs into the woods, where he finds the hatch where he was thrown, and he hears a search party. He calls for his dog, who points to the officer's watch, but she also senses Nick and he tries to lead her to the hatch, but she runs off in the other direction and the whole group follows her, and Pete goes behind and looks at the place where they hid the corpse. In the evening, their group talks about how they will soon find his body, but Pete can't take it anymore. He is going to tell the police everything, although according to Annie he is as much involved as they are, because he didn't do anything that night. The police come to Annie's house again, and Nick whispers that she can't get away. Annie is packing up the house, and when Victor wakes up, she says goodbye to her brother and her father walks in and throws her out. She warns that if anything happens to her brother he will come and kill him. At night the search party continues to work. The doctor tells them they have 2 to 3 days to find him if he is not severely injured. A helicopter flies over Nick and he tries to open his eyes and wiggle his fingers. Brian comes to Marcus and leaves his card for him to call if Annie comes, and asks him to tell him if the 2003 Mercedes that was stolen on Monday arrives. At home, Nick lashes out at his mother for her perfect world, which she tries to control completely, but when he breaks the glass, everything goes back to normal, as if nothing had happened. But after a few moments, his mother can no longer control herself and falls to her knees in hysterics. Pete is caught in the street by Marcus, who tells him that the police are after Pete and takes him with them. Marcus, at gunpoint, asks Pete to show them where they hid the body, because if they find it, they will drag Marcus down with them, and he doesn't need the trouble anymore. One of the bullies calls Annie and tells her that Matthew is going to go to the police, but Marcus is actually there waiting for her. Annie calls Pete asking him to meet her at the bridge. The guys are up to something, and Nick tries to get the attention of a detective who is doing crossword puzzles, Then he disperses the pigeons and she finally notices that Pete is about to leave. Pete comes over to the boys and Annie, who has been watching from below, is being prodded by Marcus. He asks Pete to run home and they should get off since Pete has been tailed. When the police show up, she snatches the gun from Marcus, but because there's nowhere to run gets out over the top, and when she comes down Brian asks her to tell them where Nick is, but she silently runs away. Nick jumps on the net and yells that she's going to get caught, but she yells that she never will, so she can hear him after all. Annie goes to the club to get money for the stolen ring and then goes out on the dance floor to get her mind off everything. She turns out to have long hair, which Nick is either shocked or delighted by, because she always went with a hat. In the morning she goes to her mother's grave to repent. Nick tries to get through to her, for he knows she can hear him, but she only walks away. Annie breaks down the doors of the school and leaves an envelope of money for Victor in her locker. Nick asks her to tell the cops where her body is, and when he yells she turns around but thinks she's going crazy. She wants to relax and take a shower, and Nick is already cut off as his body tries to wake up. After a shower, he lies down with her on the sports mat and tries to connect with her. She sheds a tear, and Nick only wakes up the next morning when she is gone and the school day has started. At this time, she comes to his house and breaks down the doors. She goes to his bedroom and they look at his baby pictures together and she amuses herself. While Nick is knocked out again, his mother shows up and Annie escapes. She hurries into the woods to the hatch with his body, but Nick is not there. Nick asks her to pay attention to an object lying nearby. She notices it and it turns out to be a packet of Pete's anti-smoking candy. She asks Nick to hang on and runs away. At school, Annie gets a hold of Pete and he tells her that she was actually ratted out by Marcus. Marcus comes out of the station and sits down with the guys, but Annie ends up there asking them to get out. The guys leave him a gun before doing so. She asks him to leave, and Pitt wants to overdose on pills in the meantime. And Annie has already brought Marcus to his knees to shoot him, because he turned her in and Nick is still alive. Pete comes into the world to see Nick and tells him that they hid his bodies on the rocks by the causeway. Pete's parents run into the room and he wakes up. Marcus tells Annie that the body is at the dam and she leaves. But not so easily. He shoots her in the thigh and she shoots him in the shoulder and then limps away. Annie calls Brian and asks him to give the money from the locker to Victor, and they should hurry to the dam. Nick is there. At this time, he goes downstairs and sees his body among the rocks, and Brian's assistant informs him that the dam will open in 15 minutes and everything will be flooded there. Nick tries to get his body out, but the dam has already opened. The police arrive and ask to stop the current, and Nick is lucky. The water hasn't had time to reach his face. Brian notices his body and the doctors find a faint pulse. Annie whispers his name from the causeway and Nick's spirit hears it. Nick's mother is told he is alive, and in the ambulance he loses his pulse and passes out. Annie is bleeding out in the car at this time, and as she falls asleep an officer approaches her, who notices the wound and asks her to leave the car, but she drives off. Nick is resuscitated and follows his body. His mother is asked to wait in the hallway while they do what they can, and Annie tries to get away from the chase. She gets pinned down in an alley on both sides, but Nick whispers that he needs her, and most likely she hears this and breaks through the fence. A little later, the police find only her abandoned car, and she is already sneaking into the hospital through the back door. Nick's spirit calls her after her and stops her in front of the entrance to the floor so she doesn't get caught by the cops. In the hallways, Annie meets his mother, who immediately slaps her in the face, but Nick asks her to convince her to listen to Annie. She tells her mother that she doesn't know how, but she feels he's around and she hears what he says or wants. She begins to repeat his words, telling her that she has been in his bedroom since he went missing and was reading his poem for the first time, and her mother realizes that it really is Nick. Annie asks to go in to see Nick for a minute. She can help and bring him back, but she is already bleeding in the room. She lies down next to him and uses the pendant her mother gave her to ask him to come back. Then Nick's spirit realizes it's his time and Nick's body awakens and thanks her for saving him, and then they both pass out. Victor is flying the plane, and when it returns to land, Nick comes in and asks what the boy is doing here alone, but he replies that his parents don't know he's here. His sister was supposed to bring him, but she died. Then Nick offers to send her a letter and writes on the plane to Annie to say hello and send her on a distant flight. Support the channel by subscribing, like and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.